Welcome and thanks for listening to another show of The Health Zone. I'm Mícheál Ó Mathúna. Check out and like our Facebook page on www.facebook.com/The Health Zone Show, or follow us on Twitter on the letter D Health Zone, or log on to our website on www.thehealthzoneshow.com. If you subscribe to our mailing list on there, you will get the Health Zone Show delivered to your inbox every week, and also you'll get a copy of our free ebook called How to Transform Your Health in 2016. Also, if you have any feedback on the show, or if you would like to get in touch with us, our email is tunein@thehealthzoneshow.com. Today I'm talking with the founder of Dzoghen Beara Retreat Centre in Castletown Beara in Cork, Ireland, Peter Cornish. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Micheál.
Tell me, Peter, for somebody with a very little sight, you had a fantastic vision. Where did that come from?
I think I'd always had a dream about establishing a centre. When I was young, it was to establish a centre for artists. And then as I got older, I became interested in spiritual things, and so I had the vision to start a Buddhist centre, and that's where it came from. I think maybe the fact that I had such bad eyes helped me to see the world in a slightly different way. I don't know.
What's it like not to see the face of another?
Well, you get used to it. It's been that way all my life, and there's other ways of seeing people. You can see by their body language and just their sort of whole presence. You can read people quite well that way. In fact, sometimes I think we get a bit distracted by detail looking at people. We can judge people too easily.
And how are you judging me?
I'm judging you as somebody who's scaring me to death with this microphone.
I know, Peter, you had a secret despair of where your future could be or should be when you were younger. What was this?
When I left school, and I could see very little, so many options and jobs weren't available to me. I couldn't drive a car, for example, and so it was difficult to imagine what I was going to do.
And Peter, you had a spiritual experience when you were younger. Can you tell me about this?
Yes, it was more of a sort of out-of-body experience, actually, when I was a young man working in a hotel in Exmouth in Devon, and I went up to Exeter for the day, and I was just walking around the streets, and then suddenly I seemed to be many feet above myself, looking down on myself and all the world, and people were coming and going, and I wasn't part of the scene anymore. I was completely outside my body and what was going on in the world, and it's really difficult to explain. I think to explain any religious experience, I call it a religious experience, but it certainly affected my life. It made me realise that there was a lot more to this than meets the eye.
In what way do you think you changed since that experience?
I don't know that I changed completely so much. It was more a matter of just encouraging me in the way that I was already going, I think.
You say the necessary resource will always show up. Can you tell me how this applied, say, in your own case in creating Dzoghen Beara?
Well, it certainly was the case that there were many occasions when building all these buildings in this huge place, we'd run out of money, and I kept going when there was no money, even when we were in debt, and somehow the money always seemed to turn up. That's what you're referring to, I think. So I think perhaps it may be that just if you have a sort of crazy confidence enough and a real vision, I've heard other people say this, that things just unfold like that, and the resources always turn up when you need them. I think if you're thinking in the right direction and doing something more for others than for yourself, that sort of unlocks the key.
Would you say it's like having a very strong faith in your vision, Peter?
Yeah, I guess so. I think once you have a vision, you have faith in it.
Tell me, Peter, about I Ching.
Oh, the I Ching is an ancient Chinese book. It's also known as the Book of Changes, and it advises you. What you do is you sow either coins or yarrow stalks, and depending on how they fall, it will tell you your present situation and the situation that's going to develop into the future. So it's, in a way, it's like a fortune telling. It tells your fortune, but it's amazingly trustworthy. It comes up with, time and again, it's come up with amazing results.
Could you give me an example of that?
Yeah, the best example was one that was, I'd had some interesting results from the Book of Changes. I believed, some people do it every day, but I believed that that's rather trashing it. It's rather, to do it for me, it was so special. I would only do it on rare occasions when I really needed an answer, when I was stuck and couldn't make my own mind up, which was rarely. I had to come to a decision when I had two alternatives, and the best example was when I was living in Scotland at the first Tibetan Buddhist centre in the West under Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. I'd bought a cottage up there, and there was no water supply to the cottage. There had been an old water supply, and the forestry had ploughed all the hill behind the cottage and ploughed up the old well, spring well that was on that mountain, and there was no sign of it. There were just furrows full of trees. And I searched the mountain for the well and couldn't find it. So then there was a stream running down by the side of the house that actually dried up in the summer. But because I couldn't find the well, I thought I'd better use the stream. So I asked the I Ching, should I still continue to look for the well, or should I use the stream? And I was hoping it would say the stream, because that was going to be a damn sight easier than looking for this well all across this 1.5 square miles of mountain that had been ploughed up. And so I threw the I Ching, and the first hexagram, first hexagram came up with, and each hexagram has a title, and the title of the first hexagram was the well, and I didn't even know there was a hexagram called the well. There's 64 hexagrams, and I hadn't ever checked them all. And anyway, it came up with the answer so specifically as that. And then when you saw it the second time, and the second one that came up was, would you believe, water. So I got the well changing to water. This completely blew my mind. So then I had to go and look for the well again on the mountain, and we did find the well eventually. In fact, to find the well, I got a local builder to come up with copper rods to do another sort of divination, which was water divining. And he went backwards and forwards over the mountain with his rods, stuck his heel in the ground in the middle of nowhere and said, dig there, to his mate. The guy dug down into the ground with his shovel and got about nearly a metre down. And we found nothing at all. And we were going to give up. And then the builder said, go on, have another go. So he dug down a bit further, and clunk, he hit a house brick. And he dug it out. And then a couple of frogs hopped out. And we found the well was there exactly where he said it was. So there was a divinations with the I Ching and divinations with copper rods afterwards. And for me, that convinced me that not only that divinations work, but there's a whole level of stuff going on here that we haven't got a clue about.
I know you met Ram Dass as well, didn't you, when you were in Scotland? Yeah. What was he like? He'd just come back from India, actually, and he'd been in America with Timothy Leary and moved over and gone to India and found his guru there. Yeah, he was a cool guy. He taught us one day in my house in Scotland, me and about 15 other young people, sitting on tables and chairs and on the windowsill and on tops of cupboards, and he sat on the bed in his white robes with his beads, telling us all about his guru in India, and I thought actually this is pretty much what I wanted to start, and it was a sort of prelude to what was going to happen later in Ireland here. And how was he as an individual? Was he mind-blowing, or what was he like? He was
okay. He was pretty cool. He was you're trying to get me to say something here I don't want to say, you see. He was very much playing the guru, quite honestly. Yeah. And of course he was Hindu and we were into Buddhism, so which was fine, but it was just different. He said a lot of great things and we really enjoyed what he was saying, but we were a bit nervous of his sitting there smiling and fingering his beads, looking all holy. I think we were we were a bit critical of him at the time, but of course he did great things and got a huge following and wrote amazing books. So I've got nothing but good things to say about him, really.
I know you helped yourself recover from a bad knee by doing prostrations, which included visualizations, and also throwing yourself onto the ground. Can you tell me a little bit about this, Peter?
Yes, well, I developed, through running around the land here, before we started the Buddhist centre, we used to have cattle and sheep on the land. And of course the land here is all rocks and holes and humps and hollows. and it wasn't the best sort of territory for a blind man to be wandering around in. And so I think I damaged my knee through persistently falling down holes. And so I had what's actually was called a bucket handle fracture, I think it is, in my knee, where the ligament slips out of the kneecap. I think it was also known rather discouragingly as housemaid's knee. But anyway, this happens to people. And what happens is the cartilage flips out of your ball and socket joint in the knee, and it hurts like hell. It's so painful, just for a second maybe, just briefly, and then it slips back in again. And when it's happening, it's so painful, but it's gone so quickly. But each time it happens, it damages the knee a bit more, and it gets more painful. And it used to happen about once a year, and then it started happening once every 6 months, and then 2 or 3 times every year, and then by the end it was happening every week, or even every few days, in fact. And so I went to see a specialist in Cork, and he said, "We're going to operate." And I said, "Oh no, you're not." And I went back home, and I'd been doing prostrations, which is a yogic exercise where you throw yourself on the ground full length. People have seen Buddhists doing this, and it's a fantastic exercise. You throw yourself down full length and stand up again and do it over again, and the idea is to do 100,000 of them. And so I'd had to give these up because of my bad knee. And then I found that if I was on crutches, by the way, by this time. It had got so bad, and still determined not to go under the knife. And so I decided that I would try, and because the knee really used to flip out when I moved it on an angle, and I thought if I went straight up and down in prostrations, maybe I could get away with it. So I laid down the crutches by the side of me and started to do these prostrations, and I found I could do them without it going out. And so I did like 10 the first day, 20 the next day, 50 the next day, and I got up to 200 or 300 a day. I did more when it got better, but then I was doing 200 or 300 a day. And after about 3 or 4 months, I can't remember the time, but maybe after 3 or 4 months, I threw away my crutches, and the knee wasn't going out at all. And by the time I'd done about 10,000 of these prostrations, or actually maybe far less than that, the knee never came out again. And for the rest of my life, it's been absolutely fine ever since. And the surgeons had told me that it would only get worse, and there was no cure. So the prostrations cured it. And I think it was certainly the physical exercise of moving my knee in that way, and maybe a little bit to do with the spiritual aspect of it as well. I'm not sure.
What was your experience with just a realised master like Dzoghen Trungpa? Yeah,
Dzoghen Trungpa. He was an amazing master. I actually got to know him. He wasn't so much older than me. He was a refugee come from Tibet, and he was only, I think, 3 or 4 years older than me, so I got to know him as a friend. He was quite an unconventional master. He came from a long lineage of realized masters in Tibet, and I never became, shall we say, a devotee of his. It was much more of a friendship, but just being with him was such an inspiration of the way he dealt with situations in life. He was an extraordinary master.
And how did he deal with situations in life?
Mostly he just treated everything with a fantastic sense of humour, so that you could say anything to him, and people did, because they didn't always like the way he carried on. And he just treated everything with a great sense of humour, at the same time somehow never hurting anybody or never upsetting anybody.
He's had a very interesting way of actually helping people to find themselves or to see their own truth. Yes,
that's right. He had a way of dealing with his students. he was a crazy wisdom master, and he had a way of dealing with his students in Tibet. They would in Tibet, masters would put their students through all kinds of trials to test them, to see if they really wanted to receive the higher teachings, and to to check their commitment, really. And I never saw him do it. I mean, some of the masters in Tibet tested their students almost to the point of almost to death. In fact, told them to jump over cliffs and all kinds of things, and made them lie down in a ditch full of leeches while they walked over them and left them there, and all these sorts of things. Now, Trungpa never did anything as extreme as that, but the most extreme thing I think I saw him do really was in Scotland. There was a big house he was living in Scotland that had one of those old boxes on the wall in the kitchen that was for the servants, and it had a series of rings, in a glass-fronted box with a series of rings with the numbers of the room numbers upstairs painted in each one, and a bell. And the bell would ring in the kitchen when somebody had to go up to one of the rooms upstairs, and the room number would light up. And he was in one of the rooms, and he would ring for his student, and his student. Of course, this box thing was a wonderful plaything for a Tibetan. It was a fantastic mischief machine to wind up his students to see if they were going to get angry or not. So he'd lie in bed in his room and press the bell, and a student would run up and he'd order some tea, and he'd wait until he estimated they'd just got down to the bottom of the long staircase, or even along to the kitchen. Then he'd ring the bell again, and they'd run up again, and he had them running up and downstairs, and while they got angrier and angrier, and he tested their commitment that way. I think he had great fun doing that, and he sorted out maybe the sheep from the goats.
Brilliant. Tell me, Peter, how was Dzoghen Beara set up?
When we first came, there was just a couple of ruins here, ruined houses, and not even a road in. We had to leave the car half a mile away at the main road, and we had to get a horse and cart to get into the house. And we gradually did the old farmhouse up ourselves, and then bit by bit, we built more houses, and then we built a centre house, and over the years we established the centre.
In regards to the bull house, was it really a bull house?
Oh, that was when we were first farming here, and yes, it was a bull house actually. Nobody believes me, but I built every field and every terrace and every path this place has the most fantastic views over the Atlantic. So I had to build a house for the bull because I had some Charolais cows here, and I needed a bull, and so I needed to build a house for the bull, and I built it with a bull yard outside, and upstairs was going to be a hay loft and an office, and because it had such amazing views, I decided to put in big windows. And I looked at the windows and thought, my God, this is too good for a bull house. But we actually had a bull living downstairs, and it was genuinely a bull house. But I thought one day I designed it in such a way as one day it could also be used as a retreat house when we didn't have a bull anymore. And so we were supposed to get a grant from the European Community for you got a grant for a bull house, and the inspector came along to check the bull house to see if we had qualified for the grant, and he said it was the first bull house he'd ever seen with teak doors and double glazed windows. So we didn't get the grant, but we got a great retreat house, and we did also actually get a bull, and it really was, I have to say this in my own defence, we did actually have a bull for about 2 years in this bull house before it became a retreat house.
Great. I know you said to get anything done, Peter, you had to be crazy, protected by blinkers, or propelled by some force you couldn't explain. Which one do you think helped you to create Dzoghen Beara?
Oh, well, that's easy, all three of them. Certainly I was probably crazy enough, blinkered by my eyes, and what was the third one?
The third one was propelled by some force you couldn't explain.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, we're all propelled by forces we can't explain. Certainly I seemed to be able to do much more than I would have thought I was able to do, the way things worked out. That's a force you can't explain, isn't it?
Like a higher force or something, isn't it?
Well, I don't know, it was a lower force sometimes, believe me.
How did you come about getting the name Dzoghen Beara?
Well, the name was actually given by Sogyal Rinpoche, the Lama who I invited to come here and be spiritual director of the place, and who is to this day the spiritual director of the place and running the whole spiritual side and the rest of Dzogchen Beara. And I've been asking him for, I think maybe it was probably after he'd been here about 3 years, so his first 4 or 5 visits I'd asked him for a name, to give us a name, to give us a Tibetan name. And he hadn't managed to come up with one, and so that one time he was here, and I thought, I've got to get a name this time. So he was just leaving for the airport, and he was a bit late as usual to go to the airport. So the car was racing up the hill out of the place, and I flagged it down, and I had written on a piece of paper, drawn the Beara Peninsula, and I'd written Beara across Beara, and I'd said on the top, Rinpoche, we need a name. How about Longchen Beara? And I flagged the car down and posted. He wound the window down a couple of inches, and I posted this piece of paper through the window, and it fell onto his lap. And the car raced away, and then some people were following him in another car, and they went with him to the airport, and then they came back and they brought back the piece of paper, and on the piece of paper he'd put a line through the word Longchen and written Dzogchen. And so that's how we became Dzogchen Beara.
What does the word Dzogchen mean?
It means the great perfection. It's regarded in the Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism as the highest teachings of the Buddha, and it's a whole system of teaching known as the great perfection.
What do you think stops us from actually achieving that, Peter?
Oh, what stops us is our habitual tendencies, our habits and our emotions, and all the confusion of our ordinary minds. The core belief is that we're actually all perfect in our nature, and we've sort of wandered off the path a bit, and this wandering off the path is our path actually back to that state of which is actually enlightenment. For Buddhists it's called Buddha nature. For non-Buddhists it would be just our pure perfect nature, which is what we all actually are inside. And we've just strayed away from it and got confused. So what stops us is that confusion, basically our emotions and our habits and all the distractions of this worldly life that we lead. And the whole point of a spiritual life is to get back to our true nature, which is that state of perfection. So that's the joyful and encouraging and celebratory message of Buddhism, basically. That we're all actually already enlightened, but we've just got to get back there.
A bit like we're actually just remembering who we really are.
Yeah, remembering who we are. I guess so, yeah. We've certainly forgotten it in a big way at the moment.
What is it like to watch other people take over and redirect your lifetime work, Peter?
Not easy. Now it's fine. I'm really happy, but it was a long process. Now there's some most wonderful people here. And they're working so hard for almost nothing to make the place work, and I'm totally grateful to them. But in the early days when we started, without me, people told me that I should be running the place, but I'd backed off and I was never an organizer. So there was a sort of power vacuum, so people came in and everybody had their own ideas for how the place should develop, and it was a complete nightmare watching other people take over your dream. I don't recommend it to anybody, to watch other people take over their dream and stamp their ideas onto what you had thought of, what your vision for the place was. And it was it wasn't easy. The point was there's no regrets, because it was a process I had to go through, and I learnt so much from that process.
And what did you learn?
I learnt that because I was also guilty of fighting my corner in those days, and I think I learnt that if you give up and relax and allow things to happen, and you have a strong vision, everything's fine, it'll all work out, it'll be cool.
You said that if we wish to see, we must gaze without looking. What do you mean by this?
This is referring to one of the higher teachings of Buddhism, but it's basically, one could say, it's to gaze without looking. If you're looking, you tend to be looking at the detail, and when you're looking at the detail, you're noticing things and you're thinking of things, and you're stuck in you get stuck in the detail. You get caught in the detail. Gazing is more just not looking at anything in particular, and so it's a way of clearing the mind and allowing your innate awareness to arise when the thought process fades.
What do you think of the new temple being built here, Peter?
Oh, I'm thrilled that there's a new temple being built here. I did ask that it should be built nearly 30 years ago, and because all the money had to go into other things, it didn't get built. And then a few years back, I asked Dzoghen Rinpoche again that we should have a temple, and he got behind it, but there wasn't any money around at the time, and it was all just a process we had to go through. And now the fact he's really encouraging it, and other lamas are really encouraging that it should be built, and so I'm thrilled that it's going ahead.
And when are they expecting it for it to be built?
Well, it should be starting at any time now, which is the beginning of 2016. We don't know how long it'll take, because as always here at Dzogchen Beara, we haven't got the money at the moment. We have some of the money, but the money's always come. So if it's right and it's meant to be built, the money will come. We'll see. It's going to take rather a lot of money, this one.
There might be some rich people out there with lots of money, and they might give it to you.
Well, maybe, but more likely there'll be lots of poor people who give a little, which is even more scary and absolutely wonderful and heartbreaking that people give so generously when they have so little. And that's how this spiritual care centre was built. There was certainly one or two really rich benefactors who helped tremendously, but an awful lot of poorer people put anything they could into it. And it's so that is so wonderful, and one is so grateful that people are so generous as to do that.
You had a dream of setting up a community of wide awake people, Peter. Do you think you achieved that?
I think we're well on the way. I think it depends what you call wide awake. I think that most of the people here are probably a lot more awake than I am, but wide awake ultimately is Buddha. It means the awakened one. So we're all trying to be wide awake very hard, and some of us are succeeding better than others. I'm not doing a very good job, but there are some people here, some of the people who teach here and so on are getting there.
Your wife Harriet, Peter, was an amazing woman in helping you to create this dream. What was she like?
Well, you've said it really. She was an amazing woman who helped me create this dream. I mean, she was very gentle, but could be fiery, very incredibly generous, kind person. I used to sometimes when she used to drive the car. Of course, we had a car here once we managed to get the road in, and she used to drive from Castletown Beara, and I'd be coming out with her, and she'd see a hitchhiker by the side of the road and pick them up, and she'd never leave them at the cross of ground. She'd always take them to wherever they wanted to go, even if it was 5 miles further down the road. So she was a really generous and compassionate and kind person, and without her, this place wouldn't exist. So anybody who uses the place should be more grateful to Harriet than they are to me.
It is said that difficulty at the beginning is an auspicious omen. Do you think this was the case with creating Dzogchen Beara?
If it was the case, Dzogchen Beara must be incredibly auspicious now, because it sure was difficult.
What is Buddhism, Peter?
First of all, I better say that the subject of Buddhism is incredibly vast. There's many hundreds of volumes of teachings and commentaries and explanations of the Buddhist word. So I can only give a very bare minimum sort of explanation of what I see Buddhism is. And basically, well, you probably know about Buddha. He was a prince who lived in the northern India and Nepal 2,500 years ago, and he gave up his kingdom to lead a spiritual life. So he followed the spiritual path and became enlightened, and spent the next 50 years of his life teaching by the roadside and in the fields and anywhere that he was invited to teach. I think the best way probably to sum up the teachings in a nutshell is a well-known saying of his, actually, which is many different translations of it, but more or less to say, do no harm whatsoever, do good to perfection and tame this mind of ours again and again and again. And do no harm is like the Buddhist way of non-violence and non-harming, and it's based on based on respect that we have for all beings, for all life. So we recognize the equal right to existence for everybody. For example, that a frog or a housefly has as much right to existence as we do. So above all, you don't kill any creatures. And so Buddhists basically should be vegetarian or are inclined to be vegetarian. Many aren't. The Tibetans found it difficult to be vegetarian, most of them, because of the climate there. They couldn't grow vegetables. And people in the West find it quite difficult, but that's okay. The point of Buddhism is that there's no absolutes. You do your best, and that's fine. So that's do no harm whatsoever. To do good to perfection is basically about compassion and loving kindness and doing what you can to help other people, obviously. And then to tame the mind again and again and again is really about meditation and the various Buddhist practices. And so that's the sort of outer way of describing, giving a hint at what Buddhism is. And an inner way maybe to talk about Buddha nature, which actually we mentioned just now, which is again that we all have our nature on the innermost level of our consciousness. Our nature is already perfect, it's enlightened, and we just have to get back to that. And there are many different. An analogy of that. Start that bit again. An analogy for that is often that's given is they talk about the sky-like nature of our mind, and all the habits and tendencies and emotions are cleared away. Our mind is like the clear blue sky. So, of course, we are all on different levels. Some people have a clear blue sky. There are some quite advanced beings whose sky is almost completely clear, with a few puffy little clouds on the horizon. For most of us, our skies are quite full of clouds, sunshine and showers. And for someone like me, you live in a complete fog and you can't see your hand in front of your face. But it doesn't matter, because once you've had the idea of once you've had the realization of that, you're on the path. And of course, however dense the fog is, or however dark the clouds are, there can be a thunderstorm and the sky can clear immediately. So, who knows? One thing I would like to say about Buddhism that's quite important is that in these times, in these current times of religious bigotry, of extremism and fundamentalism that seems to be plaguing the world, particularly at the moment. In Buddhism, there's no dogma. Buddhism is a very tolerant religion, so we never proselytize or try to get other people to join the religion or convert people. Of course, we can answer questions like this. We can write books. We can sing songs, but we don't go out shouting about Buddhism and trying to convert people. That's a really important part of it. And in Buddhism, there's no dogma, there's no commandments, there's no word of God that if you don't obey, you're going to go to hell. There's more. It's more a matter of tolerance and not and again non-violence. For example, it wouldn't be really cool for me to go out. Buddha advocated poverty and living simply, as shown by the fact that he gave up his kingdom and lived a simple spiritual life in the fields. So that's not, of course, that's different from poverty being imposed upon you. It's chosen poverty with joy and generosity, and he advocated that. So it would be wrong for me to go out, for example, at Christmas on Grafton Street with a bloody great placard saying, advocating poverty, because the shopkeepers might get upset. certainly it would go right against the core values of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. And so we rather you would just show an example, live according to your beliefs, and if you live simply yourself, that'll do much more good than waving banners around. But the main point there is that to say that that Buddhism is tolerant of all religions and of all systems of belief, and doesn't impose itself upon anybody. I think that's really important in these crazy times.
What is the ordinary mind?
The ordinary mind is our everyday mind that isn't clear, that's full of thoughts and blockages such as created, as I spoke about earlier, by our habits and by our emotions. That's all. Ordinary mind is contrasted to pristine awareness, which is actually the nature of our mind, which is more like our innate understanding, our innate nature, to some extent like our intuition as well, because it is said that we actually know everything, because of course if we're enlightened in our nature we do know everything, and in a state of non-thought some of that everything can appear to you, and you can and then you have real understanding. Whereas, does that make sense? Whereas our ordinary mind is stumbling through the day to day, and it is there so that we can get around in this world of ours, you know. It's like it's said that ordinary mind developed perhaps through evolution as a way of enabling us to cope in this world, because we need three things to get on. We need to build a shelter for ourselves. We need to get food, and we need to procreate. To do those things, we need to establish a solid world of, like this room, of walls and solid floor and earth outside and so on, and all these it is said in Buddhism that all these are created by ordinary mind for our survival, whereas in the case of awareness, the scientists have shown that everything is actually just energy, moving energy, and our minds solidify everything into this realm that we see at the moment.
And do you think this ordinary mind limits us?
Oh, it's completely limiting. It's limiting us to the three things that I said. All it's good for really is so that we can shelter, eat, and procreate. You're going to use another word there, weren't you? And it is limited. It is intentionally or whatever. I don't know about intentionally, but it is limited for that very reason to those things. So it can also, of course, think about spiritual matters. It can write poetry. It can paint amazing pictures, but at the same time, it's all in the context of that ordinary mind. And of course, the ordinary mind comes from a very basic level of digging in the ground to creating symphonies like Mozart. There's a vast range of it. So we mustn't knock ordinary mind too much, but it is not. Ordinary mind can point us in the right direction, but it can't get us there.
The great Longchenpa said that the ordinary mind is what happens when you don't know how to relax. Do you think this is true? Yeah,
well, what he means there is, it's a nice way of putting it. The idea that ordinary mind happens appeals to me, but it's almost like it's saying that ordinary mind is adventitious. It's just something that happens. But when we don't know how to relax, is that the idea is that if you relax totally in body, speech, and mind, particularly in speech and mind, of course, which is thinking, if you relax totally like that, then you become available to awareness, which is our natural state.
You go into retreat yourself, Peter, but what's the purpose of a retreat?
Well, there's lots of purposes of a retreat, but it's actually to be able to practice exactly what I was just speaking about would be the main purpose of retreat. But it's interesting because if there was quite a lot of opposition to retreat in the 20th century. I think things are changing now, but in the 20th century, people rather thought you were copping out by going on to retreat. But in this building that we're sitting now, for example, there were the spiritual care centre at Dzoghen Beara. They've recently had people from groups of people who are people who work on the front line in Africa, in war zones, and in epidemics and so on. Can't think what they're called. Anyway, you know what I mean. And we had a group of those people here who are out doing the second of the Buddha's things about really doing good to perfection, really helping people. The frontline heroes, they're amazing people. And they used to somewhat criticize people who sat on their bottoms on cushions in the shrine room or in retreat. In the 20th century, there was a sort of conflict of interests there. It never came to fisticuffs, but but there was a sort of room for some controversy there, and then now it's changed somewhat. This group of doctors from Médecins Sans Frontières came here to the spiritual care building and actually took courses in loving kindness, compassion and meditation. And so the barriers have broken down now, because the people who are out on the front line working to help beings have themselves started sitting on cushions because they realize how it will help. So I see this as a change in the 21st century, very hopeful that people are realizing that yes, there is actually a purpose to sitting and practicing. Of course, while the people who the doctors used to say you're wasting your time sitting on your cushion, the people who were sitting on their cushions were saying not that you're wasting your time helping, but that the only real way to help in the long term, because you can never get rid of all the suffering, the only real way to help is to get yourself together, and then you can get other people together. But that situation seems to have resolved somewhat now.
You say that true change has to well up from within, Peter. Can you explain this?
Yeah, well, I think that's really again the same as I've just said. Actually, that change, true change, only happens when you slow down, and the conventional mind, the ordinary mind, the survival mind, as I call it, comes to rest, and then change can evolve from within. Change from the outside. Change happens on the outside all the time, imposed upon us, changes that we don't like death and things, but also good change can happen on the outside. But the real change, again, is like the reason I was giving for sitting on your cushion. The real change can only come from within.
I know you spoke about this innate wisdom, Peter, but at times it can be blocked by our habit of thinking. How come this happens?
Well, again, our thoughts get in the way of our innate state, which is pure, pristine awareness. If, as is the case, the belief is that we are all basically enlightened, that we're all Buddhas, that we're all awake, wide awake, deep, on the deepest level of consciousness, then of course thoughts get in the way. They're confusing. They actually prevent this innate awareness from arising.
Do you believe in life after death, Peter?
Yes, I think life after death has become an extremely contentious issue. in the West particularly. In the East it's no problem at all, but in the West it's become an issue probably because of our involvement with science, because throughout history, through all the great civilizations, the Sumerian civilization, the Egyptian, the Greek and so on, for millennia man has always believed in life after death, and it's only in the last 500 years, since starting with Copernicus, Galileo and Newton and the scientists, the classical scientists, they were able to disprove certain religious tenets, such as they were able to disprove the fact that the sun actually went round the earth. And once they proved one thing, it seemed that the whole of the religious doctrine seemed to be questioned. And more than that, as they relied more and more on the burden of proof, they wanted to everything had to be provable, and you can't prove life after death, or not so far. We can't. Science was challenging a lot of the religious precepts and demanding proofs. And classical physics said that everything had a beginning and end, so they couldn't envisage the idea of life after death. And that was the traditional classical form of physics. And then quantum physics came along and changed everything, and new sorts of physics came along in the 21st century. In fact, as recently as 2003, they discovered that 96% of the universe is missing, or at least, of course, it isn't missing, it's that we can't perceive it, it's invisible to us, so to us it seems to be missing. So that means that we are perceiving 4% of what is actually there, 4% of everything in the universe, 4% of this room, 4% of my mind, 4% of our bodies. So that's a tiny that's changing our view of everything completely. And the other thing is that now the theoretical physicists are coming up with all these new ideas. This is not crazy Californians, but it is physicists working in laboratories and universities all over the world, investigating theories like, for example, string theory and M theory and the multiverse theory. And the idea of the multiverse is that there are multiple universes. Now, this is a regular theory of modern physics, which is being studied by mathematicians and countless students all over the world, and it posits the idea that there are multiple universes, and we, each of us, live in these different universes simultaneously. At this moment, we are actually alive in all these different universes and acting out all the different possibilities of any action that we take in a different universe. So in this universe where Hitler won the war, they quote this. In this universe where Hitler lost the war, in another universe Hitler would have won the war, or the planes would have not hit the Twin Towers. So this is such a far out theory that which is being seriously investigated by the regular scientists, by regular physicists. And so compared with a theory like that, does life after death seem even strange anymore? It seems quite plausible, doesn't it? So I'm sure as the 21st century goes on, life after death will cease to be this big deal. We'll just we'll investigate further, but nobody will even consider it an outlandish theory anymore.
What's the main message from the book, Tibetan Book of Living and Dying?
The main message, I think it's all the things that we've been talking about today, actually. I suppose the main message would be the same thing, to practice loving kindness, to do no harm whatsoever, and to practice and study and practice meditation. That's just my version. You should anyone should read the book. I don't like to speak for another author. I can tell you the purpose of my book if you like.
Yeah. What was the purpose of your book?
The purpose of my book was to encourage people to I suppose partly to encourage the people to come and partake of the delights of this charity on the crazy cliffs in West Cork here called Dzoghen Beara. But also it was very much to get people to just consider all these things. Because we're living in the age of materialism, and that's changing, I'm sure. But we need to understand that materialism is not the answer, and that the best way the way towards happiness is to simplify your life, as the Buddha taught, and preferably to give away as many of your possessions as you can, and to live simply and not think that we can make ourselves happy by owning an Audi.
What do Buddhists mean when they say it's all a dream?
Well, it's all about perception. You know, we perceive so little of what's really going on. We perceive just the faintest sliver of reality. And there's an example often given in Buddhism of 3 blind men being shown an elephant. They take a blind man and he feels an elephant's legs, and he thinks that the elephant's a tree. Then another one feels the trunk of an elephant, and he thinks the elephant's a snake. And the third one feels the tusk of an elephant, and he thinks the elephant's a spear. This is just a story to illustrate that if we only have a small part of our perception, if we only perceive a small part of reality, we have no idea what the whole of reality is like. And that's a way of saying that with our limited perception, of course, it's all like a dream. But actually another example of this is there was a Buddhist saint, a woman called Yeshe Tsogyal, and her teacher Padmasambhava was telling her about the vastness of reality and how little we see and how tiny our perception is. And she asked him to show her the whole of reality as it is. And he laughed and said, if I did that, you'd die or go insane. So she persisted in asking him, so he said, okay. He said he would show her the equivalent of 1 grain of pollen on one of the many flowers of a large flower called the Udambara flower. And so he showed her this tiny bit of the whole of reality, and she fainted for a week. that's a story of sort of explaining how our perception is so limited. In fact, interestingly, that was Buddha 2,500 years ago, and then 2,500 years later, in 2003, the scientists found out, I think I mentioned this earlier, the scientists discovered that we only perceive 4% of the universe, and that 96% of everything is beyond the range of our senses. So that's a similar way now of saying that we only have a very small perception of everything. And then there's another way of looking at what we do perceive. That's what we don't perceive. And what we do perceive, when quantum physics came along in the early part of the last century, there's a thing called the double slit experiment, which changed everything, which showed that particles can go backwards in time, particles can be in two places at once, and particles are only there when you observe them. In fact, everything is a wave, and when you are looking at it, it becomes solid, it becomes a particle. This has been around for a long time, and it's the basis of quantum physics. And quantum physics is not some crazy idea again, but it is used in everything today. For example, without quantum physics, there'd be no television, there'd be no telephone, there'd be no radio, there'd be no personal computers, there'd be no satellites. It's used in everything electronic. But the scientists haven't got a clue what it's all about, because they don't understand how it's possible for things to go backwards in time. But the most important part of that is that for Buddhists is that it says that things are only there when you're observing them. And so this is another way of saying that it's all a dream. What we see is things become particles on the act of looking. Until there's an observer, there is nothing there. This was according to Buddhism. And it seems to be verified now by experiments that have been done all over the world by serious scientists who've proven this over and over again. So Buddha said, things are not what they seem, nor are they otherwise. At first that seems like a paradox, but actually it's incredibly clear what he's saying. He's saying things are not what they seem. Well, we've tried to establish that in what I'm saying. Things aren't what they seem. In other words, it's all a dream. But he's saying, nor are they otherwise. So what he's saying there is, things aren't really like we see them, but we make them like that with our perception. So we solidify things, as in quantum physics. Waves become particles. Waves of moving energy in space become solid particles, so we get this room, and so on. So things aren't what they seem. They're not. It's a dream. Things aren't really like this. We establish that. But of course, we've made it so solid that when you hit something, you actually hit it. So, for example, in my book, Dazzled by Daylight, I talk about, I was telling an anecdote about how someone in London in the 60s punched me in the face, and I used that anecdote as an analogy to explain this idea that about the solidity of things. So I say, so solid have we made our reality that every time we get punched in the face, it actually hurts. So that's a way of saying that things aren't what they seem, nor are they otherwise. I can't help adding on to this. Have you heard of someone called Bishop Berkeley in Ireland, Berkeley in England?
No, I haven't actually, no.
He is actually another great Irish genius who has not yet really achieved his full place in the lineage of Irish geniuses. He was in the 18th century, in the early part of the 18th century. I think he was Bishop of Cloyne, but he's well known. He's probably better known outside Ireland, I'm not sure. But he was George Berkeley. Well, don't worry, George, I think your time is coming. Because he made this very point. He wrote a thesis called On Immaterialism. And he said that without a perceiver, there is no perceived. In other words, without someone who's looking, without an observer, there is nothing to observe, which is the same thing as the quantum physics is saying. Famously, he used a chestnut tree. He talked about a chestnut tree and said, when the chestnut when you're not looking at the chestnut tree, is the chestnut tree was there? Does it exist when there's no observer? And he was putting over the idea that without, as I say, without a perceiver, there's no perception. There's nothing to be perceived. There's a limerick, a rather amusing little limerick on this subject, and it was scrawled on the wall in the Quadrangle in Oxford, or was it Cambridge, one of the universities, where there was a chestnut tree, a famous chestnut tree, and on this wall was written, there was a young man who said God must find it exceedingly odd that this chestnut tree continues to be when there's no one about in the quad, and underneath it was scrawled in a different hand, young man, your astonishment's odd, for I am always about in the quad. That's why this tree continues to be. Signed by yours faithfully, God.
Fantastic, love it.
That's all really so it's all a dream, you know. There's a lot of evidence that it's all a dream. It's not just it was a Buddhist precept many 2,500 years ago, and it's been proven by the scientists today. We're living in an illusion. It's a complete dream. We just see such a small part of what's going on, and I think that's just really exciting, because it means we've got so much to learn. All the scientists are mad to find out what the other 96% of the universe is, and that means not just the universe out there. It means this room, our brains, our body. 96% of everything is imperceptible to us. Wow, that's incredible. Just as a matter of interest, I heard the other day that when we look out into space with our telescopes to the furthest reaches of our galaxy than all the other 100 billion galaxies that there are beyond our galaxy, and we look back in time 13.7 billion years, we can see almost back to the beginning of the universe, to the Big Bang. Now, what they call the cosmic microwave background radiation. That's going out as far as we can see, sort of upwards and outwards, things getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Then on the other level, looking down into the fabric of this table, down and down and down until we get to atoms. Then we go through atoms to subatomic particles, and then we go into the smaller and smaller subatomic particles. As far as we can go that way, between the smallest place we can get to and the largest place we can see, the furthest out we can see, is said they reckon that human beings are exactly in the middle between those two. I'm not quite sure of the implications of that, but it sounds really, really interesting to me. Quite a coincidence.
You spoke about the observer there as well, Peter. Can you tell me, what is the observer?
Well, the observer is, obviously us, but the observer in this case is basically, of course, our ordinary mind, because it's our ordinary mind that is seeing all this limited perception, is seeing this room and making it solid as it is, so we can get around in it. What
is enlightenment?
Enlightenment is our natural state. It is our innate awareness, which is the deepest level of our consciousness. That is who we are, basically.
And do you think it's possible
to get to enlightenment? Yeah, sure, but it's not easy. It's the ultimate goal. I can't tell you whether there's any enlightened beings in existence at the moment or not, but it's well, you can imagine enlightenment means that you're omniscient, that you know everything, you know the detail about everything that there is, and you know the general way that everything is. So of course, I haven't met many people who can claim to be omniscient.
Peter, how do we access the wisdom that's shining inside but can be obscured from the process of thinking?
Well, the answer to that is by not thinking. But it's not, which sounds easy, doesn't it? But it's not just not thinking, because not thinking would be a dull, unconscious state. You can knock someone out and say, they're not thinking, they're enlightened. So it's a matter of being. That's why we talk about ordinary mind. Is what happens when you don't know how to relax. It's like relaxing. You need to relax, and the secret is to relax and remain totally alert and aware. So it's not about a dull state of unconsciousness or a dull state of non-thought. It's so that your mind isn't thinking, but you're totally alert, awake, trembling with energy.
Tell me, Peter, about your own practice. What do you do?
Well, my own practice is a very long way from that, I can tell you. I just practice meditation and study to some extent the teachings of great masters and past saints, particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, but also, as you will have heard, I'm very interested in modern physics and everything that's going on at the moment. It's very exciting, and a lot of it is confirming what the Buddhists thought. There used to seem to be a great dichotomy between science and religion, but now, in terms of Buddhism at least, a lot of what they're finding out seems to confirm the way that we were taught.
Is there any particular master that you got a lot of inspiration from, Peter?
Oh, many masters, yeah. I got, first of all, I started with Trungpa in Scotland, and then I went to Brazil to see another master called Chagdud Tulku, and who was amazing, and who I did 5.5 months retreat with in a little small concrete box in the Brazilian jungle, and of course Soga Rinpoche, who has taught us so much here at Dzoghen Beara.
What are your thoughts on happiness then, Peter?
I really think the way to happiness is through wanting less, actually, through not being driven by our desires, by wanting less, because the more clutter you have around you, the more confused you get, there's more worries there are. The real way to happiness is through simplicity. That's my fundamental belief, and of course following a spiritual path, and opening your mind is absolutely crucial. And opening your mind means opening your heart to others, so that you realize that we're all in this bloody place together, and you see people suffering, and how can that not open your heart? And so you begin to love everybody, and when you love everybody, of course you're to some extent not tormented, but you're really moved by their suffering, but it opens your heart so that you actually have this great feeling of love for all beings, and that makes you, I think that makes you happy. Happy is a funny word, isn't it? Because people can say, how can you be happy when other people are suffering so much? But the happiness comes from a sort of calmness and a realization that this life is just a flash in the pan, and the suffering is really tough, and everybody's having it so tough, but everybody's doing their best, and that's really heartwarming, and you get happiness from that.
What do you think stops us from experiencing that compassion or that openness within ourselves?
The rat race, in a nutshell. We're so conditioned to try and achieve, particularly now in the West, more and more, and of course materialism has driven us to want a bigger house and a better car and holidays everywhere and more stuff, and that kind of makes us selfish, because we're in competition with instead of loving our neighbours, we're in competition so much all the time with them, right from school, where we're competing on the sports field and in the classroom, and it just runs on, and we've got to drop that competition and allow ourselves, realize that the way to happiness, it's got nothing to do with the size of your car or your house or the number of your possessions. Quite the opposite, in fact.
Do you think when we are beyond the judgmental mind that we can get a glimpse of this peace and happiness, Peter?
Yes, of course we can. It's a matter of that's inevitable once you get beyond the judgmental mind. It's getting beyond the judgmental mind that takes the work. That takes some work, and that's why you go on the spiritual path and practice meditation, and try to open your mind so that you can realize your own innate awareness.
They say that all unhappiness is the result of comparisons. Do you think this is true?
Well, that's the same thing, isn't it, about competition, where if we compare ourselves all the time, I think what you probably mean there, isn't it, is if you compare yourself all the time to other people, you see people who appear to have everything, film stars and top sports stars and so on, but if you look at their lives, are they happy? They put on a good pose sometimes, but you might say, are they content? And they're certainly not content. Some of them will be claimed to be happy, and some are happy some of the time, but most of them, look at their lives, and most of them seem to be tormented.
Even the comparisons we have about ourselves as well, and comparing our lives where it is now and where it was.
Yeah, well, of course, and we need to deal with the past. The past is really useful to us as a training, but we don't want to get into this this guilt trip that is so prevalent it's not so strong these days, but it used to be so strong in Ireland that most Irish people talk about a Catholic guilt trip.
So true, because I heard a while ago guilt is a completely useless emotion.
Yeah, I think it is. Guilt is a useless emotion. Pondering things that you've done wrong in the past without guilt is extremely useful. But there's no point in guilt, because what you have to do is, if you've done something wrong in the past, you have to make recompense for it in some way, preferably. You have to regret it. And you have to make up your mind. You have to resolve. There's 5 different, which I forget now, but one is regret it, another is a resolve never to do it again, another is in some way to make recompense for it. But none of that's got to do with guilt. You just roll up your sleeves and get on with it. And you can see that those things that you did wrong, although they might have hurt people, because that's the real wrong, although they might have hurt people, it sounds tough to say, but actually it was a lesson for you. And if you ignore that lesson, then you should feel guilty.
Do you think that difficulties are born from our own confusion?
Well, don't you?
Of course.
Our own confusion is the difficulty, actually. That's our confusion is the difficulty. It's a difficulty we have to get over, because when we cease to be confused, we're in our natural state, which is perfect, and there's no difficulty.
But you say the way to happiness is to want almost nothing. What do you mean by this?
I don't mean abject poverty, particularly not poverty that's imposed upon you from the outside. It's chosen poverty. And I think maybe poverty isn't such a good word, because it implies misery, doesn't it? That's why earlier I spoke about poverty with joy and generosity. If it's a chosen poverty, it's actually a very joyous state. Maybe rather than poverty, I would use the word simplicity, to live simply because the more possessions we have, the more they make demands on us. We're protecting them, or we're polishing them, or we're having to send them to be serviced. And it just takes up so much time. And the simpler we are, the more simply we can live. I think the happier we are. And I think that was the essential first teaching of the Buddha when he left his palace, gave up the sumptuous riches of his kingdom, and chose to live as a beggar. That was his central teaching. It's almost one of the most important tenets of Buddhism that's not always talked about by New Age Buddhists now, who want to appear to practice Buddhism and yet surround themselves with riches. It's quite key, actually, to say that Buddhism does espouse a simple way of life.
Do you think this is possible now in the 21st century, Peter?
Well, absolutely. It may not be possible in the way that Buddha taught it in the intense spirituality of those times, when Buddhists went around with a begging bowl and knocked from door to door, and had no possessions at all except just one begging bowl. That's a bit too extreme for these days. Anyway, we're all too health conscious. God knows what you might get put in your bowl. It's certainly too much sweet stuff, I'd say. So you need to establish a sort of middle way that Buddha taught, which is perhaps not absolute poverty, but getting rid of, that's why I said getting rid of most of your possessions. In fact, not even most of your possessions, getting rid of the unnecessary possessions, only keeping what you really need. But you do need to be able to feed yourself, obviously. So I don't think anyone's advocating these days that one should become a beggar.
Do you believe in the power of acceptance?
Yes. Acceptance is being able to accept everything is really crucial. Acceptance is what I was talking about earlier, like giving up, and it's only when you give up everything that you really open. You give up all your desires and all the craving, and you open. Then you can open to what is. But acceptance really is quite difficult. It's like total acceptance is what we're after here. Partial acceptance is accepting the bits you like and rejecting the things you don't like. And that's dangerous, that sort of acceptance, because it can lead to slavery. But total acceptance is the acceptance of everything, even of slavery. Because if you have a slave master who's bullying you, if you are able to accept completely and everything completely, then even the humiliation of being a slave is no longer humiliation, or the bullying is no longer bullying, because you use it as your path, and that disempowers the slave master or the bully.
Is there a fine line between acceptance and being passive in your life?
Well, being passive is okay if it's totally passive, and the idea is you see everything that happens to you in your life as a teaching and as part of your path, because that's what life is. It is path. There's no difference, all the good bits and the bad bits. And if you accept everything and see everything as a teaching, then you don't fight. You don't fight against what happens to you, and it makes it much easier to put up with the bad bits. If you really accept everything as your path, what have you got to lose?
What are your thoughts around blaming people, Peter?
In Buddhism, the belief is total personal responsibility. Actually, for me anyway, let's say, I believe that I am to blame for everything that happens to me. This world is my projection. It's my fault, and I'm to blame for everything that's going on, and I have to take responsibility for that as a teaching. It's not taking guilt for it, it's taking the blame for it, or taking the responsibility for it, realizing if I was perfect myself, if I'd achieved the state of enlightenment, the world would be enlightened. That's quite a complicated issue, but when you stop blaming people and take responsibility taking responsibility yourself for everything that happens, then it's amazingly freeing, because we spend all our time blaming people, pointing the fingers at others, as a way of getting out of the situation ourselves. And it's if you think about it, it's amazingly liberating to give up blaming people and just saying, okay, this is my situation, and I'll get on with it as best I can. It may not always be great, it may be terrible sometimes, but it's for me to deal with, not to point the finger at others.
Peter, do you think the American dream has distorted our thinking?
No, don't get me onto America. Yeah, I think the American dream it's the same thing again, harping back to the materialist age. America has completely distorted our thinking. It's our fault because we've taken it on board, this American dream, but the American dream is that we can all make it, but it's a limited dream, because they're not talking about living your life happily in poverty, are they?
An old man you met in Greece said, Peter, that the less you need, the happier you will be. Live simple, live away from the crowd and its aspirations. This is the pathway to wisdom and eventual freedom. It is desire and its object that chain our souls to the earth. Do you think this is true?
Well, of course, that's what I wrote about when I was in Greece and met somebody who I saw as a spirit of Diogenes. And I met him on my own one day at dusk by the Pyrene fountain, and he came across and told me the story of Alexander the Great and Diogenes. This old man came shuffling out of the darkness with a stick and sat down beside me, and he told me this well-known story. Do you know the story of Diogenes and Alexander the Great?
No, I don't.
Alexander the Great. Diogenes lived in Corinth and used to sit by the Pyrene fountain, where all the rich people used to pass by, and he actually lived in a barrel at one point, and he really believed in living totally simply without any possessions at all, and the rich people used to come to him for his wisdom. And Alexander the Great had heard of him and came to see Diogenes and asked Diogenes various questions, and Diogenes answered him to the satisfaction of Alexander the Great. And Alexander said, well, thank you so much, Diogenes. I am the richest and most powerful man in the world, and you're the wisest man in the world. To thank you for your great wisdom, I would like to offer you anything you want. Just name whatever you want, and it's yours. And Diogenes said, yeah, I want you to get out of my sun. You're standing in my sun, will you please get out of my sun? And which was a symbol really of saying that's all he wanted in the world. It's a story, again, it's an allegory saying that again, the same story about the importance of simplicity, of living without too many possessions. That was Diogenes, and that's why I loved him.
And why do you have such an affinity for Greece, Peter?
Well, that's why, basically. But also because I went to Greece first hitchhiking in the 60s when nobody used to go to Greece because you couldn't get to Greece by road because you had to go through Albania, which was completely closed off, and the only way was by ship from the foot of Italy, and most people got not much further than Rome. So we went through Rome and down to Italy and across on the boat, and we found Greece, because it had been so isolated, was extremely poor. There were hardly any tarmac roads. There was almost no electricity. The roads were dirt roads, and there were hurricane lamps and candles in all the tavernas. And the people were so incredibly generous. As you see, again, as poor people, like in Arab countries, apparently, where they're really poor, where all this trouble is at the moment, the people are the most courteous and generous, and they'll give you everything they have to strangers. And it was the same in Tibet in the olden days, and the same, I think, everywhere. Poor people are like that. That's another reason for it. It just shows that how simplicity and poverty it's so much easier to be generous and kind and compassionate when you have so little. And so Greece was really like that, and we were treated to such generosity in Greece. People came running up from their houses with armfuls of oranges to give us when we were just walking by, and there's many stories I told in my book about the generosity of Greece, and it was an enchanted place at that time.
What are your thoughts on the education system, Peter?
On the Western education system, the general Western education system, I think they're doing good things in Finland. I've heard now, where you don't go to school till you're 7, and the teachers are all called by their first names. Is that the same here in Ireland? I can't remember.
Still think it is Mr. and Mrs. I think in the majority of places. Yeah.
Okay. In England, everybody's called by their surnames anyway, but here in Ireland, at least, adults and children all call each other by their Christian names, but at school they've still got a title, I guess. In Finland, the teachers anyway are called by their Christian names. As I say, they don't go to school till they're 7. They can choose the subjects they want. It's a very open and liberal system. I think the education system is completely and utterly wrong at the moment. They're cramming the kids' heads with facts, just testing their memory. They're not educating them. I mean, do you remember anything that you learnt at school?
No.
I think, what a waste. How many years do you spend at school? 10, 15 years, whatever it is. What an incredible waste of one's most precious years of youth. It's amazing. My daughter went to Summerhill School in England, which is a famous, the world's most famous, probably progressive school. And there the children didn't have to go to class if they didn't want to. The children made all the rules for the school. It was completely free like that. My daughter, and she could choose what lessons she wanted to learn, and there was no pressure ever on her to go to class. She could do just what she wanted to. Of course, under that situation, the kids went to class and they learnt. And she became a doctor of anthropology. She got her PhD at King's College, Cambridge. And that was with that sort of education, when she could go to class. And she didn't work all that much at school. But as I said, we learn nothing at school anyway. So how can you keep the kids on a sunny day stuck in the classroom learning stuff they don't want to know, when they could be outside running around in the sunshine enjoying their youth? We're going in exactly the wrong direction. We're teaching children younger and younger. We're teaching them mathematics at the age of 3. We're doing preschool and so on. Preschool would be fine so the parents could be liberated and the children could be in preschool, as long as they didn't learn anything. The way to learn for children is through play. And children aren't even allowed to play half the time here in Ireland because they're afraid that they might get hurt in the playgrounds, and the parents will sue the school. So the schools can't get insurance. You know the story. It's a crazy situation. It really saddens me to see children being crammed at such an early age. And you look at the children doing their leaving certificate here in Ireland, and there's such competition. We were talking earlier about competition. That's real competition, and that's no way to spend your youth.
Interesting enough, I actually read the book Summerhill. I think it's a fantastic school. I think it was one of the schools in England that actually has the highest level of happiness per student than any other school in England.
And another little thing about Summerhill School, I'm not sure they haven't changed it now, but when my daughter was there, and since the beginning of the school, the boys and the girls all used to swim naked together in the swimming pool, which is perfectly natural and pure if you grow up that way. It's only clothes that make it all weird. And that school was the only school in the whole of England that had never had a teenage pregnancy.
Wow, that's really interesting.
The emphasis there was really on the understanding that children at an early age need to play, and they learn through playing. And if they want to learn, they will learn. So if you let them go to the classes they want to go to, the classes they're interested in, they'll really learn. You've got to want to learn to learn. You can't force stuff on people like that because you just don't remember it. You might remember it long enough to pass your leaving cert, but so you've got an exam, big deal. But it's just brainwashed you.
What do you think of loneliness, Peter?
Loneliness is a huge problem for people. I can only really, I think, speak about my own case. When my wife died, 22 years ago now, I found that living on my own, I found that the lonely time, the real time for loneliness was in the evenings when it got dusk, and then you felt the loneliness. I think maybe partly because everyone else was having fun and you weren't. But also because 6 o'clock is when samsara starts to steam up. You know, there's stuff on television, you're going out drinking, and I was here, I couldn't drive, so I was here on my own, stuck in this remote place. And I used to feel the loneliness a bit in the evening then. So my cure to it was, I decided, because of the way I was living, I decided to go to bed at 6 o'clock at night, sleep through that dusk period and that evening period, and wake up at 2 in the morning. And I've done that for the last 22 years. And I get up at 2 in the morning, and you've got to watch your ego getting up at 2 in the morning because you don't half feel superior. All the rest of the world's sound asleep. All the rest of the world's sound asleep, and you're up. Big deal. But actually, I'm joking there. The thing is, at 2 in the morning, it's easy to feel. It's great for feeling compassion for people because you think of all the people, the school teachers and your friends and the policeman and the soldier and the thief and all people lying down in bed with their heads on the pillow. And it's very easy to love people when you see them like that. It's only when they're in your face that is more difficult. So there's lots of reasons that I enjoy getting up. The other thing, I'm an early riser anyway. I'm a morning person, so that was good for me. But I found I like to do a lot of writing and, of course, meditation practice. And 2 in the morning is a wonderful time for that because the world's quiet at that time. And so that's the way that's just the personal way that I handled loneliness. And since I started doing that, I've never been lonely since. Not once.
What are your thoughts around authority and power, Peter?
Well, basically, we have to put up with it, don't we? The only authority I accept, basically, I suppose, is my own authority. But that doesn't mean that I go around breaking the law or causing, or in fact would avoid it at all costs because of the trouble that it would cause both me and other people. Who has the right to tell us what to do? We're big boys and girls now, we've grown up. If you live according to the Buddhist precepts of doing no harm whatsoever, doing good to perfection, and above all, which is really difficult, putting other people as much as possible before yourselves, or at least equal to yourself so you care about people, then you don't need laws. You're not going to do anything wrong anyway. And so that's how I feel about authority.
What are your thoughts on the media, Peter?
I don't know much about media because I don't get involved with any of it. I haven't watched television for about 20 years. I gave up the radio for many years, and I did get drawn back into it a bit again, but I've given it up again. I never go to see films. There comes a point actually when you're practicing when unfortunately it ceases even to be a diversion anymore. I used to love to sit down and watch a good DVD or movie, but can't get into it anymore. It all seems a bit of a waste of time now. That's, for God's sake, that's not trying to sound precious. It probably does sound disgustingly pompous and precious, but I'm just telling you my personal state that I've got a bit bored with all that stuff. But the main thing about media is it does drag you back into the world, and a lot of it is just gossip. The stories aren't all the stories exactly the same. It's just that the names are changed. There's only a few stories, and we just make them up in different combinations as a diversion, as a distraction. And the whole point is not to be distracted. So it's the same. It's okay if there's nothing wrong with when you're bored, have a bit of diversion or distraction, as long as you realise that's what you're doing. It's just sweeties actually, and sweets aren't good for you.
Peter, what do you think is the ultimate meaning of existence?
The ultimate meaning of existence for me, and perhaps for Buddhism, I don't like to talk too much for Buddhism because it's always my own interpretation of it, but for me the ultimate meaning is to get back to our own innate nature, which is actually enlightenment. That's the purpose of existence. And the meaning of existence that's more tricky, the meaning of existence. I think I would put it this way, the purpose is to get back to our enlightened state when we will find out the meaning of existence.
And you've been living in Ireland, and more so Cork, for many years, Peter. What do you like about Ireland?
Well, what I like particularly about the Beara Peninsula, is the people are still really open and generous and friendly, so that's good. I like the emptiness of Ireland. There's so much room here because there aren't many people, and there's a lot of space, which is fantastic. I love the Irish weather. I'm addicted to rain, so that's fine. I think there's an interesting change. Again, I've talked a few times about the good things that are happening in the 21st century. I'm sure what's going to happen now is people are going to get bored with all this bloody sunshine. As the earth dries up and there's not enough water, it's going to be unfashionable to lie around baking yourself in the sun, giving yourself skin cancer. And people are going to realize rain is going to get another whole, it's going to take a great leap forward. It's going to become precious, and it'll take a little while yet, but rain, when half the world is running out of water, Ireland is going to be in a great position with all this water we've got, and rain is going to become, people are going to realise just how beautiful rain is. I love walking in the rain and getting wet. It's so much better than roasting and drying up and crackling up in the sun. I love the way that our Irish people, it's very different in most of Europe. It's a little bit similar in France, actually. In France, everybody seems to be into philosophy. In Ireland, they're really into art, is what I was going to say. And you can talk to anybody. I mean, you go into a pub in Ireland and anywhere in the country, and people are spouting poetry. And in England, you'd be kicked out of half the bars it would be so embarrassing if poetry is for wimps and wussies. And in Ireland, you go in and tough labourers and farmers and people will recite poems, and very much a country of the arts. I just love Ireland. That's why I'm here. I've spent 40 years here, more than 40 years here, and unless I loved something about Ireland, I wouldn't have stayed on this blasted piece of bloody rock here in the middle of the Atlantic.
Would you have any words of wisdom for any of our listeners in how they could create more peace and happiness in their lives? I
think just to try. You see, I can't say to people to slow down because I know people's lives are so full these days, so they haven't got a moment to slow down. But actually, so the only way to slow down is perhaps to give up some of the things you're doing. For families, it's different. If you've got families, there's no way you can slow down if you've got families these days. Particularly when I was bringing up my children here, there were very few entertainments or pastimes, hobbies for the children to do. I think Harriet used to take the children to Irish dancing and karate, and that was about it. Now there's so many sports, so many different things going on. The parents are running their children here, there and everywhere. And of course, when I came to Ireland, the women weren't working, mostly. Now both parties are working, and it's become impossible to slow down. Maybe you could find some ways by giving up something to slow down, but the point is, for single people, they can certainly find more space and slow down. If you're bringing up a family, well, the wonderful thing is that you're bringing up children, and the important thing is, I believe, that's the most important job in the world is to bring up the next generation. And the best thing you can do with the children is by example, not just through indoctrination, but that'll do as well. Teach them that about the importance of simplicity, and teach them. It's difficult. Try and find some way to teach them not to be so, or to compete, but not believe in the competing. Maybe like that.
Would you have any final thing you'd like to say before we close?
No, I'd just like to say I hope what I've said has made a little bit of sense. I'm quite nervous about talking with a microphone shoved into my face, because I don't normally do this, and I live quietly on my own, as you know, and spend most of my time in retreat. And I should probably be, at this point, infinitely cool, but actually I'm infinitely nervous, so that shows how much my practice is working. But anyway, I had to take this chance to speak, because one is obliged to offer one's thoughts if one is asked to. I hope it's made some sense. Most of all, I hope it hasn't trodden on too many toes.
Well, thanks for listening to another show of The Health Zone. Tune in next week for more exciting and interesting topics and guests in the areas of spirituality, relationships, finance, creativity, health, career, and much, much more. In the meantime, check out and like our Facebook page on www.facebook.com/The Health Zone Show, or follow us on Twitter on the letter D Health Zone, or log on to our website www.thehealthzoneshow.com. If you subscribe to our mailing list on there, you will get The Health Zone Show delivered to your inbox every week, and also you'll get a copy of our free book called How to Transform Your Health in 2016. Also, if you have any feedback on the show, or if you would like to get in touch with us, our email is tunein@thehealthzoneshow.com. Well, until next week, have a fantastic, healthy and happy week.